Okay, great. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate you giving up your time on a Sunday. So our session today is for you to find out more about standing as a candidate for Animal Welfare Party in the local elections, which are coming up on the 5th of May. So I have with me today Jane Smith, our deputy leader, and Mina Duru, who was a candidate for us in Medway in 2019. I am going to start my presentation. Hopefully, if everything works, I'm going to start screen sharing and continue with the presentation that way. So, sorry, I should have introduced myself as well. I'm Nessa, the leader of Animal Welfare Party. And as I mentioned, we've also got Jane and Mina with us. I don't know if you want to say hello, I know you're on mute at the moment, Jane and Mina. But if
Oh, hi everyone. Thank you for attending.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today.
So a couple of housekeeping notes. So this session is being recorded at the moment, and that's why for attendees, your video should be turned off and your microphones should be turned off automatically. That's the way we set the webinar up. That's because we're recording and we don't have your permission to record you, your image or your audio. So you should be turned off at the moment. And then when we get to the Q&A, we're going to stop the recording. And then from that point onwards, we really do want you to ask whatever questions you have, and we want you to feel free to ask them. So we'll turn the recording off at that point, and then we can turn on your microphone and your video if you'd like to do that as well. And if you do have any questions while we're going through the presentation, if you could ask them through the Q&A function, which is on the bottom of the screen. Along the bottom of the screen, there's some options, and there's two little speech bubbles that say Q&A, and that would be the best place to ask any questions that you've got for the Q&A. If you do have any sort of issues with the way the webinar is running, any functional issues or thing you need help with, you can put those in the chat, and either Mina or Jane will try and answer while I'm presenting. So what we're going to cover in this webinar, just a very short introduction to Animal Welfare Party in the elections we've contested so far, a little bit of background to the local elections that are coming up this year in May, why we think it's people should stand as a candidate, what we think can be achieved by standing as a candidate in May, what's involved, the policies that we might be looking to campaign on this May, and then what the process is and a draft schedule. And then we'll look at how to express interest in being a candidate. And before that, after that, we'll go on to talk about just two experiences, Jane's experience and Mina's experience from standing as a candidate in local elections. So all of the above is going to be filmed, and then we'll turn the recording off and we'll go into the Q&A. So a very brief introduction to Animal Welfare Party. We were established in 2006, and our mission then as now is to create a fairer world for people, animals and the environment. We want to raise the moral and legal status of animals, and we want to have dedicated representatives for animals at all levels of government. We are registered to contest elections in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and we'd really love to stand in Northern Ireland again. So Northern Ireland Assembly elections are coming up in May. Last time we contested those was 2016, just one candidate contested, but it was the first time we'd ever done that. And we believe we did make a little bit of history there in Northern Ireland, and we dearly love to have candidates standing again in Northern Ireland this year. So some of you may know we were originally called Animals Count when we set up as a party, and we changed our name to Animal Welfare Party. We are volunteer run, so we all do this in addition to our day jobs and other commitments, and all the funds that we receive come from either membership or donations. So we don't receive any government funds, which is slightly different to some of the other parties in our international network of parties. We've contested 15 elections so far since we began in 2006, and we've got one councillor who is Jane Smith, who's here with us now, and she's a town councillor in Alsager in Cheshire. So just to look a tiny bit at our key policies, these are policies at a national level. One of the main things we really want to see is subsidies redirected away from livestock and fisheries industries into plant-based agriculture. And we want to see government using all the levers uniquely available to them to bring about a supported transition to a plant-based food system. We want to end animal experimentation with binding targets for reduction combined with real funding and support for alternatives. We want to see increased penalties for those convicted of animal cruelty. And we want to promote healthy plant-based lifestyles in schools, GP practices, and the workplace. We want to phase out or end farming practices with poor welfare consequences for animals. And we want to end live export and all slaughter without prior stunning. And we want to strengthen companion animal welfare with an end to breed-specific legislation, and an end to the sale of animals online and in retail stores, and an end to the exotic pet trade. So obviously they're not all our policies, but that's just a flavour of the kind of policies we campaign on. And we say that we follow a philosophy of animal rights. So although we're called Animal Welfare Party, the philosophy that we follow is one of animal rights. So we do produce a full manifesto, and we normally do that each time there's a general election. So the last general election we contested, or that was held, was 2019, December. And so the last full manifesto that we produced was December 2019. It's on our website. It might be slightly difficult to find, so I've put a link to where it is there. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because if you are considering standing as a candidate for us, we would like you to have read our most recent manifesto so that you have a sense of the kind of policies that we have campaigned on in the past, and to check that that's the right fit for you. I want to talk a little bit about our international movement because it's really important to us, and it's kind of where we get a lot of our strength from. So we are part now, I'm very happy to say we're part of quite a wide international movement of political parties for animals around the world. And that's now over 20 strong. So, and that takes in Asia, Australia, Europe, South America, North America. Very happy to say that there is now parties starting in New Zealand as well. So yeah, we have new parties adding to our number every year, and that really gives us a lot of strength. If you want to see a list of all the parties for animals around the world, that list is online there at partyforanimals.com/international movement. Now, within our movement, the Dutch Party for the Animals is probably one of the most successful, and we are modelled upon the Dutch Party. They have 5 members in the Dutch Senate, 5 members in the Dutch Parliament, 3 members in the Dutch Senate, 1 member in the European Parliament, and then over 80 other members at various levels of local government. So they have been very successful in having candidates elected. But also amongst our group, the Portuguese, Australian, French and German parties also have representatives. Now in 2012, we kind of formally started working together as a group, as the Animal Politics Foundation. And we work together to increase the rate at which change happens for animals. So we do quite a lot of joint efforts together. In the past, they've been physical efforts, and over the past 2 years with coronavirus, they've kind of shifted to being kind of online group efforts that we do together. Just a few images of the kinds of things we do together. So on the left is an image of us outside the EU Parliament, where we were protesting against live animal transport ahead of a vote in the EU Parliament. On the right, an image of us launching a shared manifesto. So we believe we're the only time in history that we've had a pan-European election campaign at EU Parliament level. So there we had 12 parties for animals contesting the EU elections together in 2019 on a joint manifesto, which we launched in the EU Parliament. And we think that's the only time that's ever been done. And then moving to kind of more recently, what's we've done more recently, back in November in Glasgow, we organised together a kind of faction in one of the marches at COP26. The theme of our faction was about the need to shift away from animal products to address the climate crisis. And we had that banner there, less meat, less heat. And that wonderful prop behind, which is a globe with a thermometer in its mouth and the temperature sign above its head, which went down incredibly well at the march and was filmed and photographed a lot, and yeah, even made its way into a Netflix review of the year at Christmas time. So that's the kind of things we're able to do together when we work together. And at the end, the sort of culmination of that, we held a joint conference, a mini conference in Glasgow on the theme of shifting to plant-based diets. So just to talk a little bit about elections, I'm going to run through the kind of the elections that we've contested to date and what the results were. I also want to talk a little bit about the deposits, because one of the key things about the local elections is there are no deposits to pay, and that's why we want to take this opportunity to stand in them. So the first ever election we contested was in 2008. It was a London Assembly election, Lambeth and Southwark, and we got 1.12% of the vote. 2009 was the first time we ever stood in an EU Parliament election in the east of England, and we got 13,000 votes, or 0.8% of the vote. The first general election we ever contested was, we could only afford to stand in one constituency, which was Islington South and Finsbury in London. So every time you contest a general election, it's £500 deposit per constituency. And there are over 600 constituencies across the UK. And so we're always in a position where we would like to stand more candidates in general elections, but there's a kind of financial barrier to that. What you might notice there in the first ever general election we contested is that our results were a bit lower, 0.3%. And that's kind of a pattern that's we're familiar with now. So general elections are held under the first past the post system, and we tend to, our results are lower when we stand under first past the post elections, basically. And when we stand in PR elections, or elections run under some form of proportional representation, we tend to do better. So you'll see there that the first election we stood in, the EU Parliament election, 0.8%, for example, 13,000 votes, that was held under PR. So as we go through this, you may know or you may not know which ones are held under PR and which ones are held under first past the post, but there's a kind of definite pattern emerges, and that's why we very vehemently want to oppose the moves by the government at the moment to change PR elections into first past the post elections, because we think it would be worse for small parties, including parties like ourselves. 2014, we contested the EU Parliament elections again. This time we stood in London. We got 21,000 votes, and that's 0.96% of the vote. Those kind of deposits we were paying there to stand in EU Parliament elections, quite high, £5,000, but we kind of felt it was worth it to get our name and our message across to a really huge electorate, basically. In 2015, we stood in a general election. This time we stood 4 candidates. In London, Kensington, Holborn, Hackney North, and Putney, and our average vote share by that point was 0.4%. In 2015, we stood in our first mayoral election. That was the Tower Hamlets mayoral election. I stood in that election. I got 300 votes and 0.4% of the vote, basically, which was a good testing ground for things that we would then go on to do. 2016, we stood in a London Assembly election again. This time we got 25,000 votes. That's 1% of the vote. So you can see that we're kind of slowly creeping up there. We stood for the Scottish Parliament election for the first time in 2016 in Glasgow region. We got 0.7% of the vote. That was really without being able to do very much on the ground campaigning. So that was a great result for us. It was a kind of a trial, and we were really pleased with the result we got there. We also that year stood in the Northern Ireland Assembly election, as I mentioned. We stood in one constituency, West Tyrone. We got 0.6% of the vote as well. And that's really, we'd like to stand in Northern Ireland again. So yes, if I could ask you to share that message to anyone who might be willing to receive that message. We're really looking for candidates to stand in Northern Ireland again. 2 general elections, 4 constituencies again. And this time our vote share went up slightly, 0.5% of the vote this time. So it's kind of slowly creeping up each time we've done the general elections. 2019, we stood in local elections. So Jane contested her seat in Alsager. She got 357 votes, which is 9.8% of the vote. And Mina stood in, I've said Rochester, but it's actually Medway, isn't it, Mina? And 229 votes, 4.1% of the vote. And crucially, there was no deposit to pay there. We stood in 2019, later on, just after that, in the EU Parliament elections, the last ones that the UK took part in. This time we got 25,000 votes, or 1.1% of the vote. Later on that year, there was another general election, the last general election that was held. This time we stood in 6 constituencies. So New Forest East, Kingswood, Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner, Alsager, Chelsea and Fulham and Bethnal Green. And this time we got an average of 1%. So you can see that, you know, from the first time we stood, we were at 0.3%. We've gone up to an average of 1% now, but it has taken some time. And then last year, I stood in the London mayoral election. I got 16,000 first preference votes, 63,000 second preference votes, which is about 0.7% of the vote. Now, the mayoral election is one of those elections that the government, that was held under proportional representation, but it's one of those elections that the government wants to change to being held under first past the post. And if that were to happen, what you would see there is where some people were very happy to give me their first preference vote. So some people, 16,000 people gave me their first preference vote. That would likely change because under first past the post system, people feel they have to vote tactically. So kind of voting with your heart for who you really want to win, that kind of goes out of the window because you know that actually it's a straight kind of 2-horse race in a way. So a lot of small parties would be affected by the move if mayoral elections shifted from being held under PR to first past the post. Also the same day, the London Assembly election, we got 44,000 votes this time, as 1.7% of the vote. And in the Scottish Parliament election, which was held on the same day, sorry, just to go back, actually I can't see the results there on my screen. It's dropped off my screen, but I think we were at 0.6% of the vote there, if anyone could correct me. Is that what it says? Yes. So you can see there that over time we've paid a lot of money in some cases for the deposit to standing elections. Sometimes it's been a really high figure, other times lower. It's never lower than £500, except for local elections where there is no deposit to stand. And so that's, as I said, that's one of the reasons we really want to take this opportunity to stand candidates in local elections. So some background to the local elections that are happening this year. So as you know, they're taking place on the 5th of May. So the Northern Ireland Assembly has elections. In Scotland, it's all local authority elections for all local authorities. In Wales, it's elections for all local authorities. And then in England, it's all London borough councils, certain county councils, metropolitan boroughs, certain district councils and unitary authorities, 6 local authority mayors and 1 metropolitan mayor. Now, if you're wondering if there are elections happening near you where you are, or maybe you've already found this out, but if you haven't, there is a way of checking, and it's a link on the Electoral Commission website. The link there, I'm hoping Mina or Jane can put that in a chat so you can get that link. Yeah, okay, great. So yeah, you can go to that link, you put in your postcode and it will tell you what elections are happening near you, basically. And that link is also on our elections page on our website, which is animalwelfareparty.org/current elections. So just to think a little bit about why you might stand as a candidate. Obviously, one of the things you might do is, raise awareness of animal and environmental issues in political decision making, and also creating a space for animal rights in local politics. And for some other people involved, that might be the first time that they've really given thought or time or space to thinking about animal rights and environmental issues. What we believe we're doing is working towards a more eco-centric type of politics and away from a more ego-centric type of politics. And for some of us, we are making a stand against speciesism. Obviously, we're going to help grow Animal Welfare Party by standing wherever we stand, and whatever the results are, we'll be helping to grow the party. And of course, you're also making a little bit of history. If it's the first time Animal Welfare Party has ever stood somewhere, if you're the first candidate to ever stand in that area on an animal rights ticket, then you're making your own little piece of history. And hopefully you are inspiring others there in that area, or who see some of your campaigning, to take action. And of course, if you win your seat, that means a real chance to bring about change for animals and the environment. And Jane, who has won her seat, will talk a little bit about that later on. So in case you're wondering what kind of policies we might campaign on in the local elections, here's a kind of flavour of what they would be. Now, if you were a candidate, you wouldn't have to campaign on all these issues, and some of them wouldn't apply to you. So this is more of a kind of menu of the kind of things we would like to campaign on, and candidates will be able to sort of choose from this which issues were most relevant to their area. But there's a kind of headline policy. We oppose speciesism in all its forms. We'd like to promote healthy and sustainable plant-based food and drink in public settings, including council events and in schools, obviously where that's relevant. We'd like to campaign for wildlife tunnels or native hedging for boundaries in all new planning applications where relevant. We'd like to press for action that preserves, enhances and creates habitat for pollinators. That's, for example, campaigning for more grass verges or roundabouts or strips or floral displays or wildlife meadows, or more pollinators in schools, and also for the local community to be educated on the value of this and why it matters. We'd like to propose silent fireworks at all council funded events. We'd like to oppose every new planning application for intensive animal farming or related processing in the area, of course, where that's relevant, where that's happening in the area. We'd like to push for a total ban on trail hunting on council-owned land in the area, including tenanted farmland. We'd like to propose measures that foster community resilience in the face of the climate and biodiversity crisis. For example, tree planting, creating shade or flood defences, or working on food security initiatives. We would like to make a point of campaigning to protect every healthy tree and hedgerow in an area, ending the use of animals in any council-funded entertainment, and opposing all council use of pesticides and herbicides. Oops. We would like to prioritise the climate and biodiversity crisis in all decision making, and actually some councils haven't yet declared climate emergency, so we'd like to push for that to be made where it hasn't yet been made. We would like to encourage ethical and environmentally friendly businesses to make the area their home. And then we know that there will be policies very specific to a local area that a candidate would probably have ideas of themselves. And that might be, for example, tackling homelessness, or creating activities and opportunities for young people, or fostering an inclusive and welcoming community. So the above really are kind of is a menu, and a candidate would work with us on deciding which are most relevant to campaign on in their area. So just to talk a little bit about our candidates and what's involved in being a candidate. So what are we looking for in a candidate? Well, we're looking for someone obviously who's motivated to speak up for animals and the environment. You do need to be a party member, and you do need to be supportive of our vision and our manifesto points, and happy to talk about them yourself. So that's why I would say please do have a read of our most recent manifesto to check the kind of what we're campaigning on chimes with what you also believe and are happy to campaign on. There are certain eligibility criteria to meet, and I don't mean those set by our party. Our only eligibility criteria for ourselves is that you're a party member. But there are eligibility criteria for the elections you're contesting. Usually that is that you're over 18 years old and that you are either a local government elector where you're planning to stand, or you own land or property in the area or work in the area, so that you have some kind of connection to the area where you're planning to stand. There are a couple of elections where that criteria is wider than that, where you don't need to live or work in the area where you're planning to stand. Generally speaking, that's the main criteria. On a practical level, we're looking for people who have enough time to campaign in April and May. The draft schedule will be coming up next. You don't need to be extremely confident. So we're not expecting fully formed kind of candidates who are overly confident now, but we do need people who are prepared to go outside their comfort zone, because standing in election, there will be things that come up that take you outside of your comfort zone. So we are looking for people who are prepared to do that. We do need people who are prepared to research issues that may be the kind of policies you're standing on, but it could be issues that you haven't thought about yet. And so we're looking for people who are prepared to kind of set aside time to do that, to kind of arrive at a reasonable position for our party to take in dialogue with us on certain issues. We do need you to be adaptable, or a bit of a problem solver, as it were, because nearly always when we stand in elections, there are things we weren't expecting, unexpected challenges, issues where we need to work out a solution. So we need you to have a kind of problem solving mindset and be willing to try new things, whether that might be recording a video of yourself talking to camera for the first time, or whether that's talking to people in the street or doing some kind of media interviews. We really are looking for people who will represent the party positively, and what I mean by that is that with a respectful manner of communication, and a professional manner of communication. So we always say that in terms of Animal Welfare Party, we come from a point of compassion. So we always want to kind of keep the compassionate and respectful tone in our conversations, even with people that we disagree with. That our address is professional, that it's kind of actually not really noticeable the way we're dressing. We just look like other politicians, and the main point that we're making that's different to other politicians is that we're there for animals and the environment. And to be prepared to have a basic understanding of issues such as libel, defamation, and sub judice. There is a short course that we can run on those issues, but basically it's to understand that if you are speaking in a professional capacity about the party or your candidacy, that those are kind of issues you need to have in mind. And ideally, we would like people to be online and to have either a smartphone or a camera. That's so that you can take pictures of your activities and of yourself campaigning. Just to run through the process and the draft schedule. So on the 1st of February, we will open applications, and there's two ways that might come to you. If you're a member now, you will be emailed with a message saying that our applications are open and how to apply. Or you can go to our webpage, animalwelfareparty.org/current elections, and how to apply will be on there from the 1st of February onwards. The deadline for expressions of interest is the 23rd of February. And then we'll be conducting interviews with candidates on the 5th and 6th of March and the 12th and 13th of March. They are remote interviews with prospective candidates. By the 16th of March, we are hoping to be able to notify all successful candidates by email. And then if you are a successful candidate from that point onwards, we would ask you to start kind of doing a few things for yourself. And the first thing you do would be to make an appointment with your local elections office to hand in your nominations paperwork. Between the 17th of March and the 5th of April, we'd be wanting to have photos taken of candidates. And that's kind of something we would kind of like you to take the initiative yourself in a way. So we're looking to have professional headshots taken of candidates. And so the first port of call would be whether you know any professional photographers to do that for you. And if not, then we'll help you find someone. And we might also at that point ask you to record a very short 1-minute piece to camera about your candidacy. By mid-March, you should have received your nomination papers from us, and they need to be handed before the 5th of April. So to your local elections office. So you physically take those in, you hand those in. I would just say that we never leave it until the last day, the 5th of April, because quite frequently there is some sort of issue with nomination papers, there's some sort of error or something that needs changing. So we always leave ourselves a bit of a buffer so that we can correct whatever issue it is and get them back in on time. So the official cutoff point is 4 p.m. on the 5th of April to hand papers in. And then the next day, there will be the announcement of persons nominated. That's something that your local elections office put out themselves. But from that point onwards, then we start to publicise our candidates and our policies. Between the 7th and 11th of April, we would be designing election leaflets centrally. So our plan is to design for every candidate to design a 2-side A5 leaflet, which then would be sent to your home or office or wherever you'd like them to be sent. We've budgeted that we can afford to produce up to 1,000 leaflets for each candidate and 5 posters if desired. So they would go to your home or office or wherever a central point for you to receive them. And then they would be for you to distribute locally in the area where you're standing. And just to point out that there is no Royal Mail free distribution of election leaflets in local elections. So any leaflets that you do ask for, they have to be delivered by hand by either you or whatever team of supporters you've managed to build up to help you. So once you have your leaflets, the main campaigning period would be between the 18th of April and the 5th of May in your local community. Obviously, that's if we don't have any kind of restrictions due to COVID. If we did, then that campaigning might go back online. And the kinds of things you would do when you're campaigning, you might be invited to debates, you might be invited to community events, and you also might be invited to do media reviews as well. Polling day is the 5th of May, so polls are open 7 in the morning until 10 at night, and you can campaign right up until 10 p.m. on polling day, as long as you're not kind of in any way intimidating people going into a polling station. And then there's a couple of things once the elections have happened, a bit of wrap up for us. So the 6th or 7th of May, the results will be out and we'll start wrapping up. There's certain ways we have to get rid of our leaflets and posters. So we have to make sure that it doesn't go in normal rubbish, for example, but there are some rules around that. And then by the 10th of June, we have to submit our election spending returns, which is obligatory. There's no way out of that. It's something we have to do, but it's for us, a party as small as ours, not spending a lot of money, it's relatively simple, but it just requires you to still be able to do that. So your obligations would be finished by the 10th of June once you've done that. So how to express interest? Once again, the 1st of February, we'll be sending an email to all members, or you can visit our elections page, which is animalwelfareparty.org/current elections. So I want to hand over to Mina now to talk a little bit about her experience of standing in Medway in 2019. Mina.
Hi, thank you so much, Vanessa, for this great overview. I hope that wasn't too intimidating to people, hopefully not, but yeah, it's fun memories to think about this whole process, really. So yeah, I stood in my local elections back in 2019, and it was something really new to me. It was a little bit daunting because I don't come from that area at all, and I didn't have a huge network of friends and fellow animal advocates or anything like that there. So it was very much kind of making it up as I went along. Where I stood is kind of a sort of urban area in the countryside kind of thing. What was quite interesting is the constituency where I was standing was the seats were very kind of bitterly disputed. So the stakes were quite high. And I think I was really lucky that some people did cast their votes for us, because everybody felt really strongly about that one spot on the council going to Labour or the Tories. So it was quite a bitter contestation, but it did seem to be an interesting process in terms of bringing these issues to people's awareness. Again, with these areas that are a bit rural, it's quite nice that a lot of people do kind of like have a fairly positive image of nature and animals, at least in some restricted ways. A lot of people will have dogs, or they'll have kind of close experiences to being in the countryside and interacting with wild animals, or even farmed animals they see in the fields, etc. So that's kind of a helpful thing to have. And also in terms of our platform of standing in favor of defending the environment, that's something that resonated quite a bit with people. So I think my process was very much kind of trying to identify what would resonate with people, and also understanding when Vanessa was talking about doing some research. For me, that really meant looking at what the local issues might be that were relevant to our manifesto and our general ethos, and where I could kind of try to create some traction on these issues, try to really kind of focus on those. So you'll see this is the leaflet that was created for that election. And the on the right hand side, you can see some key policies that we came up with. So as I remember it, I put together some ideas for this, and then we had a little discussion with the committee, with Vanessa and a couple of other people, to make sure everything seemed kind of coherent and aligned and strategically sound and everything, which was a really smooth process. And I have to say, big thank you to everybody at AWP who supported me in putting everything together, both in very practical terms, putting together the leaflet, and also more kind of giving me a bit of support on how to go about things strategically, without, I have to say, being kind of pressuring me in any way. They really kind of let me run with it, on the understanding that we shared a general vision and sense of how to relate to people. As Vanessa said, one thing that's quite important, certainly to me, was relating to people in a way that seemed warm and articulate and compassionate and inclusive and constructive, particularly when people might be quite surprised by the idea of campaigning for animals in local politics, and or feel like there are different priorities. And so it's just a practice of just kind of building up a little bit of a thick skin, and just remembering that everybody's not in the same place, hasn't had the same journey as we have. And it's just really nice to think that that might be that first seed of a thought that you're planting in their head, and sometime down the line might have a nice impact. So yeah, a bit of research on local kind of salient points. And the other thing was just making time to do a bit of campaigning. And I have to say, if that's daunting to anyone, I did this during my final exams at university and I still managed. So if I can do that, I'm pretty sure anybody else can find a bit of time to make it happen. Yeah, there's a couple of pictures here. Yeah, the gentleman with the dog actually was really supportive. We bumped into him, myself and the volunteers who were helping me drop off leaflets. We bumped into him a few times, and he was always really supportive. And we kind of really created a bond over the fact that, yeah, he has a dog, he understands liking animals. I think the idea of the campaign took it a little bit to the next level for him, because a lot of people love their dog but don't necessarily think of other animals. But yeah, he became quite engaged on Facebook and things like that. And so some of that was engaging with people on the high street, and then also doing some door-to-door leaflet distribution. I personally didn't distribute in any of the, sorry, could you go back one slide just for 1 sec? I'll be as quick as I can, but I just wanted to point out the other thing. Yeah, I tried to be quite mindful of when people had signs saying absolutely no, like male or anything like that. I didn't kind of insist, because I didn't want that to be confrontational. So yeah, there's two things I was going to mention briefly. The picture on the left is, someone posted this on Twitter. I actually thought one good way to kind of interact with people locally, and not just with the objective of trying to win the election, but trying to create debates and kind of convergences locally, was I organized a public meeting at a local kind of town hall, village hall rather, where I invited all the other candidates and the residents to come together and discuss the impact of climate change and the climate crisis in Medway, in the local area. So what you're seeing here is a couple of residents, and including one of them who became quite involved as a volunteer, helping me do leafleting and outreach, and also the gentleman in the blue jumper, who's actually a long-standing Conservative councillor, who was really excited to talk about these issues. And it was really nice to kind of see how, even if we don't end up being represented, how that kind of event, this was very experimental, but it might just be something that someone would run with a lot better, how those people can maybe run with these ideas, seeing that there is support from people, from their constituents, for them to push these ideas a little bit more strongly with the council. So for example, he was very supportive of like a zero waste shop and some water fountains. So obviously I'm talking more about ecological issues here than animal issues, but I had designed this event around ecological issues because I thought that would bring more people together than just talking about animals, which may or may not have been right. But yeah, so that was kind of the idea with doing something like this. So that's the kind of initiative you could take. And the volunteer that I mentioned, who is in this photo, I met her because I also rented a stand at a vegan festival that happened not long before the elections, and kind of tried to rally a bit of interest from a couple of local people who'd be interested in helping in the campaign. And if you don't have a big network where you live, that's quite helpful, because it's really nice to have a bit of support, and it also gives you a bit of legitimacy in the eyes of the local community. And obviously you're not wasting your time, because you are also kind of spreading the word about AWP at whatever vegan festival or whatever the event might be. So yeah, thanks for going back on that slide for me, Vanessa. Yeah, there's just so yeah, engaging on the street, people that might be sometimes a little bit kind of skeptical or, you know, a bit standoffish, but just give them a big smile and a clear message on why you're doing what you're doing and how that might relate to people who live in the area. And usually it goes down quite well. And Ranjan, one of our absolute all-star like volunteers, who's very involved in what goes on in the party, bravely and kindly came out to Kent to help me as well, do some of the leafleting. So yeah, that's us standing there in Rochester. Yeah, feel free to carry on, Nessa.
So yeah, you also,
yeah,
if my memory serves me correctly, there was also a couple of vegan cafes or veggie cafes,
yeah,
and you got them to take your leaflets.
Yeah, which was really nice.
They were quite supportive.
Yeah.
So you found a couple of shops, businesses that would take your leaflets as well.
Yeah, that was another thing that was quite positive. And then actually a couple of other things. One of them was there was a debate where I wasn't invited, unfortunately, but that happens sometimes with our smaller parties, with the kind of big parties at a local, like a school or something. They'd organized a debate between them on various issues, and I attended just as a spectator, and that also gave me an idea of what the key arguments in the elections were on key issues, and gave me a chance to kind of form an opinion on these things, because people will sometimes want to hear what your opinion is on other issues. So I think it's important to, while you want to keep the focus on the issues that we campaign on, to kind of have a bit of a sense of that, because you don't want people to think you have no interest in what actually goes on in local government, like for people and businesses and things like that. You kind of have to tie it together a bit, in my view. And on the way out, there was actually a couple of journalists, and they asked me for my opinion on what had happened in the debate. And I kind of made a point of saying, I'm actually standing in the elections, you know, for animals, people and planet. And I actually am always quite shocked that, you know, these issues don't come up as much. I try to put it a bit more positively than saying I was shocked, but yeah, that was kind of like, there might be little opportunities like that around the elections. And there's also it just so happens in that area, there was a local democracy blog that was always kind of posting news about what was going on in local politics and government and things like that. And I kind of met them through this, just by kind of posting on Twitter about my campaign. And they invited me to write a few columns, which unfortunately I didn't have the time to write a lot, but a few columns on kind of animal welfare and environmental issues, which then reached their audience for free. So that was nice as well. And yeah, Vanessa, do you want me to talk about anything else, like the kind of, oh yeah, I suppose there's one more thing I was going to say is, so I think the results were fairly positive given the bitter contestation I was talking about earlier. But the nice thing was at the counts, I was able to also talk to candidates from all kinds of other parties, including people from UKIP and the Greens and all those people, and kind of try to find ways to link up with, you know, without being, you know, hypocritical by saying, oh yeah, great, UKIP, I agree with your policies. One of the things they tend to say, in my experience, at least in that area, was, oh, we really care about animals and nature. So it's kind of a chance to say to them, well, kind of to what extent, and to kind of very gently challenge them and encourage them to think a bit more progressively about those things if you can. And I have to say, with the Greens, for example, that was quite I felt that was quite an enriching thing, because they invited me to sit with them at the count and everything, which was very nice of them. But I realized that quite a few people in that party weren't necessarily engaged with animal issues, and whether they then take that with them and bring that on into the DNA of their party, or gradually think, actually, I kind of like AWP, then I think that's a kind of progressive and positive way to spread our kind of key messages. So yeah, I think there were some positive kind of outreach effects on that, even though obviously I wasn't elected. So yeah. Is there anything else you'd like me to say, Nessa?
Elected, but you did get the second highest vote share of our party ever in elections so far. So you got 4.1% of the vote there. Yeah, which is our second highest vote share ever. And yeah, you feel like you had lots of constructive conversations with people in that area. So overall, it was very positive for us. Even though you didn't win the seat, it was still a very valuable exercise and kind of all part of the kind of the stepping stones to kind of progressing animal and environmental issues in political decision making, and also encouraging other people to think about those issues as well.
Thank you.
So just to move that, thank you, Mina. Just to move on to Jane's experience then. So Jane, you contested your seat in Alsager in 2019.
That's right, yes. And I just want to say first, Mina, that was really excellent. I think your enthusiasm came across, and you really ran a great campaign. And regardless of the result, and it was a great result anyway, but Mina made history. Nobody else had ever stood in that area on an animal rights platform, and that feels pretty darn good. So we want more of that, apart from anything else really. And also I think that something we mustn't overlook, and I've experienced it as well, is the impact of standing and putting your money where your mouth is in local elections on an animal rights ticket. I've had notes and letters from voters who've said, I had one note card from a lady in this area who said, I've waited 40 years to be able to vote for a voice for animals in elections. This means really a lot to a lot of people, and that's not to be overlooked either. There's a sort of ripple effect of doing this, which we don't often get to see or hear about, but which is there, and that's an important part of it as well. But sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but not really. But with regards to Alsager, so I was actually defending my seat in the May 2019 election, so it was slightly different in that I was able to show voters, well, I've done this so far, here's the sort of track record, and if you vote for me this time, I also want to do this. So it's a little bit different. And I think it's important to say as well, given the result, which was a record one for us, where I am here, this is a semi-rural town in Cheshire, around 14,000 people, not at all a hotbed of animal rights, not at all. In fact, if anything, the local community here, more often than not, they'll have real links to people who are working in animal agriculture. So I just wanted to point that out, that this kind of thing can be done anywhere if it can be done here. This isn't a special case. This is a case of doing good work when you're in office, being able to demonstrate that, and bringing people on this journey, as Mina's already explained. It's really presenting our vision for a better world, and bringing people with us on that journey. So there are our main policies that we used in this campaign. I think it's quite important to say that we ran 100% positive campaign, which really stood us apart from the other parties. This particular election was characterised by the most awful mudslinging. And because we'd got a positive track record of stuff we'd already done in office, we were able to show that, remain positive. We never even mentioned any of the other parties in our entire campaigning. And I think that went down really, really well. But you're able to do it when we've got such a great reputation for punching above our weight, a tiny party doing great stuff on the ground, and that's dead easy to communicate. in an election. So it was actually really enjoyable campaigning in Alsager in 2019. But some of those things I talked about, track record and able to show people what we do. Bear in mind, this is just one councillor. I don't even have any colleagues on the town council from Animal Welfare Party. We were able to get our town council to independently declare climate emergency, which was really important because ever since that moment, that was one of my motions, I've been able to be really like a broken record, but making sure that every decision made at town council level is made through the filter of climate emergency, and that's so important. Everything else kind of leads from that, and as I think we all know, what's good for other animals is good for the environment, and these things come together very, very neatly and are really, really exciting to work on. So I think those policies speak for themselves. My experience of campaigning in local elections, unfortunately in this area, there were no debates last time. A real shame, because I really love debating. I like getting my teeth into them. That's why I loved all the debates at the general election with the hustings. Really good opportunities for us to stand up and make decent arguments for animal rights and get that stuff onto the agenda. But where there were no debates, what we did have in this local election was local newspaper coverage. And to be able to stand as a genuine candidate with a lot to say and a lot to show in terms of positive stuff we've already done was really fantastic. We did online campaigning quite a bit. I have to say, with online campaigning, you do need a really thick skin, because as I'm sure you can imagine, a lot of people have a very knee-jerk reaction to the very idea of an animal rights candidate. And to some extent, you get that when you're on doorsteps as well. But I found that was outweighed by people, even people who didn't necessarily agree with all my policies and my ideas. I think you get a certain level of respect for standing up for what you believe in, standing up very publicly for what you believe in. So I found it to be a really positive experience, actually. Once you do get a seat in local elections, the great thing is not only all the work you're actually able to do, but for example, with our town council, every single meeting is covered by local media, every single meeting. So that's countless opportunities to get animals, environment, and the stuff you do for people too, all into the papers and the local news outlets. This is a photo of some of our volunteers in that particular election. I think there were only 9 or 10 of us leafleting. So we didn't have a giant band of people. There's no animal rights group as such locally. What we were able to draw on, because I was involved in Wounded Badger Patrol, it so happened that I did have a ready-made network of about 150 people who are used to walking miles and miles every day and who were happy to campaign. So that was great, and here are some of them. Can we have the next slide, please, Vanessa?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that you know, you've got one of the ladies is holding a poster, and you did have some posters made for that election, and you managed to get some people to put them up in their windows or local shops, is it? Yeah, which
not
is just
shops. These were just
in their houses.
People's houses who were on key, who had sort of really visible spots. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, 9.8% pretty, it was unheard of, but not only that, for the West Ward in Alsager, we beat all of the Conservative and Labour candidates. And for that to be on a 100% positive campaign from, well, we are still a tiny party. It was really, really fantastic. I was so proud. But it just shows what can be done. just shows what can be done. And that was, although I was defending my seat, it was the first time that I'd campaigned under the Animal Welfare Party banner, because I'd moved over before, and the first time I won my seat, it wasn't under this this party name. So that was a really, really important moment. So generally, my experience of local elections is they're really, really worth doing. And if people do get seats on whatever parish or town council, we've got a whole load of ready-made policies that I've written and that I've had passed, and we've got a lot of support for anyone who gets in at parish level upwards. It's all there, and we've got stuff we can do. The Hedgehogs motion is a great example. So this was back in early 2018. That was my motion, which said that, okay, in our planning system locally, any new solid wall or boundary from now on has to be either native hedging, or if it's a fence or wall, it has to have wildlife tunnels every X feet. We're still working on how to enforce that better, but it was such a popular move that we've been approached by, I've actually lost count how many councils have approached us since, saying that they want to do the same. And other councils have already copied us with pride, which is a great thing. We don't mind who does it. This is great for animals, whichever party brings this through, or whichever independent. Cannock Council in Staffordshire were the first to follow suit, and I'm very happy to share the wording and research with anyone else that wants to do that. But this is exactly the kind of thing that really should have been done at local level 4 decades ago, because it's inexpensive and it's easy, and these are shared spaces where we coexist with wild animals. It's something that's just not a priority for other parties, but I can't tell you how popular it's been with people locally and beyond. We're also the first town in the UK to have a standalone pollinator action plan, which involves things like planting this beautiful wildflower meadow. That's our local park. We've now got various versions of that across the town. Makes a real difference, and it's incredibly popular with people, because as we all know, things like that are not only great for the pollinators, they're a total sensory experience. You can smell them, see them, hear them, walk through them. They're absolutely beautiful, so popular. So again, that's something that really should be done everywhere, and it's such a win-win for everyone. Thank you, Vanessa. Oh yeah, climate emergency. So like I said, that's really, although our borough council had already declared climate emergency, I wanted to make sure that our town council also did that independently, so that really I had something to bring up at every point on the town council. Every decision has to take climate emergency into account. Otherwise, what's the point of declaring climate emergency? Is it an emergency or is it not? So I think that's really important, to be able to hold other councillors to account wherever you are. And if you were a resident and a non-councillor, get your council to do it anyway. Get them to do it and then hold them to account on it. You promised us this, why aren't you doing it? It's really, really useful. Thank you, Vanessa. Oh, yes. So this is an example of this one, I knew that I would never get this through in its own right, a humane only rodent policy. Unfortunately, rodents are not super popular. So this one was kind of, it was done under the radar. I had to apply a little bit of a sneaky mechanism, but I felt it was important, so I did it. This one I put through during a debate on the council's health and safety procedures. Whereas if I'd gone to the council saying, let's not kill rats anymore, that just wouldn't have got through. Sometimes you have to be a little bit more cunning in how you get things through. But I felt this was really, really important, because what was happening was fast food outlets and supermarkets were being allowed to dump food waste, and rat traps were being put out, and rat poison. And I wanted to point out this is a human problem and it needs a human solution, and we're certainly not going to be allowing rat populations to be killed when there are other ways to do it. So I'd like to see other people do it. That hasn't had the the effect that the wildlife tunnels have had, in that we haven't had 100 other councils wanting to copy it yet, but I do believe it's the way forward. I think it's to come. Thank you, Vanessa. So, because I'm the only Animal Welfare Party councillor, we do go way beyond our own town. So this was a horrible, horrible case where hundreds of birds, mainly pigeons and gulls, were being strangulated, hung, starved, dehydrated to death in this horrendous bird netting under the Mersey, the Runcorn Bridge over the Mersey, which is a giant bridge. So we teamed up with a local wildlife group to campaign about this, even though it was in Halton, which is a Merseyside council, and success. We got that council to take down all of the bird netting across that giant bridge, and I can't tell you how good that felt. So we want to do that everywhere. If we can't build bridges without attaching bird death traps to them, then it's a very sad state of affairs, and we shouldn't be doing it. So I'm waging a campaign against every council in the country that has bird netting, but we need a lot more shoulders to the wheel to get this done. So we need people to get involved wherever they are. Thank you, Vanessa. So only last August, I tried to pass a motion for our town council to serve only plant-based food and drink by default. This motion failed by 1 vote. Not only that, but since then, I hate to tell you this, if you haven't heard already, but a Lib Dem motion has since, this was sort of a motion that followed on from mine. They said they were building on it. They weren't building on it at all. In fact, they were demolishing it in many ways. As a result, our town council has banned almond milk while keeping cow's milk. It's the craziest. I mean, it's had national media coverage because it's such a crazy situation. I think this is an example of other parties' awful knee-jerk reactions to an animal party trying to bring councils forward in terms of climate emergency and what we should be doing about it. This is the kind of opposition that you get, and really people need to be aware of that. This shouldn't stop us trying to do all these things that we believe in, because we've got to do them. There's no two ways about it. But you do get other parties doing absolutely crazy things like this, and they're a majority and I'm a minority. So it's happened. I'll be bringing this up again, though. You have to wait another 6 months plus, actually, before you can bring the same question to council. So we'll be back there. Thank you, Vanessa.
Yeah, and just to say on that point, although that particular time it failed, there are other councils in the UK where the plant-based food by default motion has passed.
Yeah.
And the idea is something that came about from chatting to our international network. And for example, in Amsterdam, the Amsterdam City Council also have I think it's a plant-based food by default system in place now as well. So your idea and the general idea is not to say you can't have animal products. It's just that automatically served as standard would be plant-based, and if you want something different, you need to request that. And it's an important.
sorry, Francis, some of those other councils, we sent our research and our wording to them and helped them. So even though our motion that time failed, we want to see this happening everywhere, and we can't be everywhere. So we're happy to share, aren't we?
Yes, and just to say that it's, you know, there are other areas in your life where you can, if you have influence catering, that you can try. It just doesn't have to be at local council level. You can also do it at work, for example, in other situations. So the plant-based by default is kind of becoming an important element of kind of influencing thought and debate around what we eat, basically.
Yeah.
So just to move on to, hopefully you've been inspired there by Jane's experience, her experience of campaigning, of winning that election, and what she's been able to do since then, and also by Mina's experience. Hopefully we've convinced you that this is this is right for you. So the next steps, if you are interested in taking this forward, so really the next step is to check if there are elections happening near you this year. That link again, it's on the Electoral Commission website, and it's a link where you put in your postcode and you check what elections are happening near you. And then to apply, it will be the 1st of February that we open for applications. That will be an email to all members, or you can visit our webpage. So that is the end of our presentation, and I'm going to stop the recording now.